Welcome back, pod people. Today's subject matter is sound, music, sound effects, everything in that regard. And in fitting with that theme, I am probably going to sound a little weird, and that is because my nose is messed up because I just had surgery on it. So please forgive that. Fortunately, my guest today, Brian LaGuardia, is going to sound really great because he's speaking on a high-end microphone because he's a professional sound person in a bunch of different ways, composing, performing, conducting, all sorts of different things. Brian, how about you tell us a bit about some of the projects you've been working on recently?
Oh, thank you, Thomas. I haven't done a whole lot of conducting recently, but I've definitely had the privilege of a lot of arranging and composing work. I arrange a lot of stuff for Austin Wintory, especially in the last couple of years. I was the arranger for the Songs of Supergiant album, recorded at Abbey Road. Most recently, actually, I arranged Austin's theme from Flow for the London Symphony and London Voices, which was like a bucket list item for me. That's one of the two best orchestras in the world. I never imagined I'd get the opportunity to do that. Certainly not so soon.
Yeah, that's really impressive.
As far as composing goes, I am lead composer and audio director at Rice Games. We'll be releasing our first title at the end of the year or shortly thereafter. It's called Shujinko. It's a JRPG with it's just so much content and such a little team. So we're working our butts off, but we're really excited to share it with you. In particular, the music is a lot of fun. It goes a lot of different places. I have three composer colleagues helping me to write the score because it's over 8 hours of music. It's
oh wow.
Yeah, it's the kind of score I've always wanted to write. It's very thematic, very not ashamed of itself, so it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's great. Not ashamed of itself. I like that perspective. I think that a lot of what I talk about here on the podcast is horror movies, which are frequently low budget, made by amateurs or made by people who perhaps do have a lot of experience but don't have a lot of resources. And I find that things that really embrace the limitations that they have to work within tend to be much more exciting and interesting than things that either are ashamed of those limitations and really try to work around them, or just have such an enormous amount of resources that they don't have any limitations,
right?
And therefore can feel directionless.
Yeah, for sure. I don't know who quoted it exactly, but there's a quote about something along the lines of limitations are what make a genius. Like that's
limitations breed creativity. Yeah.
And that's certainly true from what I found, although it has been a lot of fun exploring, just like having no boundaries and just going hog wild. I feel like depending on the project, either one of those approaches can be very liberating in a way.
Cool. Yeah, no, I can definitely see how having no limitations like that could be very liberating. And you also did another thing that you didn't mention, which is that you wrote the theme music for Fear of the Unknown, which is also the music that I use as the theme music for this podcast. So everyone has been hearing little bits of it at the beginning of of each episode. And at the same time that this episode goes live, I'm also going to upload an episode that is just that audio track. So people can listen to just that music on its own if they want.
Cool.
Yeah, so I'm a big fan of using music to accentuate other art forms. That's most common in film and television and is less common in things like tabletop games. I was inspired to include music in my games by playing Fortune and Glory by Flying Frog Games, which comes with an entire CD soundtrack back when CDs were a thing. And so I'm curious if you could talk about some of your favorite game soundtracks and how you think they really improved or accentuated the aspects of the game that you like, and perhaps if you have any in mind that wouldn't be too talking bad about your compatriots, if you could talk about games that you think were brought down by their soundtrack or that could have been really improved by having a high quality soundtrack.
Well, there are tons of examples of game soundtracks that I really enjoyed, and that really elevated the game, of course. I may be a little bit biased in this regard, but Austin Wintory usually does a pretty good job. One of my favorites is the Banner Saga, which that's a trilogy of it's also a role-playing game, turn-based combat. And the thing about that is that it was such a grassroots project, that they didn't really have the budget to do a lot of animation, and other than on the actual field of battle, for the story cutscenes and whatnot, it was largely just fairly static things, a little bit of camera animation, and it really leaned heavily on the score to sort of carry it and make the emotional beats land. And that was an example of one of my favorite game scores of all time, because it can be simultaneously very heartfelt and very intimate, but also has the bombast of a AAA John Williams score when it needs to. It'll sound like the end of the world, which it is. It's a story about the end of the world, basically, Viking in Viking terms.
Yeah.
Let's see, what else is there? There's so many. But the thing about Austin's work in particular is that it really embraces the dynamicism of video game writing, because when you're writing for a television show or a video game, it's very linear. You are very much locked into what the picture is doing, and it just goes from A to B, and that's it. But in video games, you're often writing with a lot of player input in mind that can happen at any point, and so you do a lot of loops. There are a lot of techniques where you maybe have 30 seconds to a minute of music, but you have 2 or 3 layers of intensities that you can peel back or paste on at will, depending on what the player is doing or how much danger you're in. You can track it to directly to variables that the programmers are implementing. So it becomes much more fluid and dynamic, and it's almost like an art form in and of itself. And that's one of the things that he embraces quite expertly.
Cool. Yeah, I wouldn't say almost. I would say it's definitely an art form. That brought up several different questions I want to ask about now, and it just needs to decide on the order. One thing that's not a question, just a note I want to make, is that you mentioned sort of small loops and things like that, and applying different levels of emotional intensity at different moments depending on the actions that the characters are taking in the video game, which can be harder to do in a tabletop role-playing game, except that you were telling me recently about a soundboard idea where people can mix together things like that on the fly, and that's a potential stretch goal for Fear of the Unknown when it comes to Kickstarter this October. And so I'm really excited to see if we raise enough money to do that. I think that would be really interesting to see what you come up with there.
Yeah, I'd be really excited to do that, because it's actually something that I've been wanting to do for a long time, because I love board games. I play them with my friends all the time, and we often use mood music in the background, and there's plenty of music out there that serves just fine for that. But if you can press a button to activate a stinger and then transition into a new the stakes have been raised, and the music follows suit, it's just I feel like it would just be so much more fun to not just for the I mean for everybody who's playing the game.
Yeah. I used something that's kind of like that, but with the causality reversed in one of my previous games, Cultists of Cthulhu. It's an optional rule from an expansion that you can play with, where there's a deck of music cards and a 15-minute music track that accompanies it that opens with like a loud church bell.
Hmm.
And the idea is you play the game as normal while playing the music track in the background, and every 15 minutes when you hear the bell, you interrupt whoever's turn it currently is to draw a card from the music deck and do whatever it says.
Huh.
Yeah,
That's
so
so cool.
oh, thank you. Yeah, so that way, you were talking about how the gameplay affects the music that you hear, and in this, the music that you hear affects the gameplay. So I think that there's tons of exciting things in that field that now that technology has gotten so easily accessible, you can play music wherever you want and interact with it on your computer or phone or what have you. I'm really curious to see how that art form progresses. So you mentioned Austin Wintory and a variety of different soundtracks, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that all of the ones you mentioned are purely instrumental. There are no lyrics to any of them. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. I before this before doing this interview, I came up with a list of my 5 favorite uh, horror movie soundtracks, and I noticed that all of them are also instrumental.
Hmm.
And I find this interesting, and I'm curious if you could talk about why that might be the case, because in video games, that's not necessarily the case for me. And in particular, what comes to mind is the band Crush 40, who did the soundtracks for a lot of the Sonic the Hedgehog games. And a lot of those, after they made the transition to 3D, which is when Crush 40 took over as the primary composers and soundtrack artists,
Hmm.
um, those have lyrics. And in some cases are really iconic, and like Sonic the Hedgehog fans will be able to, quote the entire song to each other. And they're really critically well received and highly regarded, but they really seem like the exception to the rule, that almost all of the other really prominent, well regarded soundtracks that I can think of are just instrumental. And I'm wondering why that is.
Well, I don't know. That seems like a bit of a generalization. There's plenty
Okay.
of um, there's plenty of amazing scores on both sides of that fence. And look, the human voice is incredible at doing certain things and not very good at doing other things. And so, if you want to be a chameleon, which is what you should be if you want to be a composer, especially like a media composer, uh, you need to learn to embrace using them and not using them, and learning when to do each. But even in horror, there's actually quite a lot of vocal scores that I can think of. The one that immediately comes to mind is Jerry Goldsmith's score for The Omen, which is incidentally was his only Academy Award win for Best Original Score.
Oh,
He recorded a lot of choir for that, singing in Latin, Ave Sultani, which is Hail Satan. It's um, and so yeah, it's orchestral as well, but the choir is very prominently featured in that score. Another good example, more recently, because that was like 1970, what was it, 76, I think. More recently, Jordan Peele and Michael Abels, the composer and director duo, made famous with Get Out.
yeah.
I think their second film,
The Candyman sequel.
uh, I can't remember which one it is exactly, but there's one of the films that they made together really heavily features choir, and it's like this clockwork, like "Ti sa no ba," like all of these
Oh,
very
interesting.
syllabic sort of march. Um, so yeah, voices for sure have a place in horror, especially. But in games as well, like Darren Korb is a big deal now, and he he writes songs basically. Like he writes more songs than he does incidental music for his games at Supergiant. So
Cool. All right. So I guess I was just mm, thinking that there was a pattern where there wasn't really one.
well, I mean, the thing about songs too is that I think they're more easily stuck in your head
Mm.
Because you can play a melody, like everyone knows Star Wars. If I go da 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 da, da, everyone knows that's Star Wars. But I feel like there's something about an actual song with lyrics that just sort of engages another portion of your brain and helps you remember it a little bit more. So
Yeah.
I can't. I'm not gonna like refute you on that.
Yeah, that's interesting. And yeah, I think part of it, at least for me, is that it's easier for me to put my own meaning into something if there isn't like an explicit denotative meaning of words in it.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, I said I said that those two were probably working on the Candyman sequel, but on further reflection, I think I was mistaken. I think that they were probably working on Us because Jordan Peele didn't actually direct the Candyman sequel; he just produced it. Um,
Us. That was it. That's what I was thinking of.
yeah,
That's exactly the score that I was talking about.
great. Yeah, I haven't seen Us. I should watch it. I really enjoyed Get Out, and I thought that the Candyman
Yeah.
sequel was um, okay, but not as good as the original, in large part because the Candyman soundtrack by Philip Glass is one of the best soundtracks to any movie, horror or otherwise, that I've ever heard. Are you familiar with that one?
Wow, that's high praise. No, I'm not familiar with that one.
Oh yeah, it's really good. Do you like Philip Glass?
Um, would say that I definitely respect him.
So
It's not really my cup of tea. The sort of minimalism,
okay,
establish a 4 bar phrase and repeat it um, over and over again while introducing like very very small deviations over time. It's sort of
yeah,
like um, a more meditative approach to music, where for me music is more about emotion and drama. Uh,
okay,
so it doesn't really click with me necessarily, but I have massive amounts of respect for it. Like I've been studying music from all around the world, and I know exactly where his influences come from, and how uh, how incredible they can be in the right circumstance. And I've been meaning to delve deeper into that side of things. I just haven't had the time.
yeah. I definitely see what you mean about how his music is less emotional than a lot of other people's. And it took me a while to get into it. And I think that the Candyman soundtrack is what made me really get it
Mhm.
because, sorry, what was that?
Oh, continue.
Because Candyman as a film is very sort of hypnotic,
Sure.
and so the soundtrack, I think, really works with that. Really draws you in, and sort of that repetitive thing. It's almost like the clock, the watch swaying in front of your face, uh, drawing you in and sort of lulling you into this false sense of security and complacency, which is what the movie's in large part about. So,
Sure. Yeah,
uh,
and it's all of the best scores embrace exactly what the movie is. So it sounds like that's a match made in heaven. Uh,
yeah,
there's actually not that it's a horror score by any stretch, but one of the things that actually one of the scores that made me pursue music initially was the score to the Battlestar Galactica reboot, which
oh,
had a whole bunch of influences, like very disparate. Like there was some Western in there, but also lots of Japanese taiko drumming, lots of Middle Eastern stuff, and and also like a lot of minimalist influence. And so I sort of got uh, a, a, a small appreciation for that as well, especially in context of like a nice montage over where it just kind of provides a nice narrative and emotional glue over the whole thing. That works really well. Uh, so yeah, I don't mean to say that like I hate Philip Glass. I just think it's very his approach is very much dependent on context, and I feel
yeah.
like with the right context, it would really shine.
Yeah, I don't think that he would work for like an action movie,
Right.
but I think that for things where it's about um, this sort of, like I said earlier, hypnotic effect.
Exactly.
Have you seen Koyaanisqatsi?
No, but is that not? Hold on, let me look something up real quick.
Sure.
Uh,
It's a, sorry, go ahead.
you go ahead.
It's a sort of documentary film, but there's no dialogue or anything. It just sort of shows different scenes from around the world and is accompanied by the the whole thing is played through with the Philip Glass soundtrack. And that does have voices in it again, although it's just sort of chanting, repeating the word Koyaanisqatsi over and over rather than, conveying a narrative through lyrics or anything like that.
Right. I think I've heard that music. I just haven't seen the film.
Yeah. I'm not sure. That's another one that I really like. I'm not sure how much that I would like it if I hadn't originally heard it in the context of watching the film. It's
Ah,
another one where I think that the pairing works really well together.
yes, and that's one of those age-old debates, right? Which is, what is the actual job of a film composer? Is it just to service the film, or is it also to simultaneously do that and create something that's fun to listen to on its own? Uh, and it's I don't think there's a right answer to that, because a lot of the really successful, really talented film composers these days um, don't necessarily accomplish that every time, and I don't think there's any shame in that. Um, One that comes to mind is Interstellar by Hans Zimmer. I watched that film and I loved that movie so much, and the score did so much for it. In fact, I was in the Chinese Man Theater in Los Angeles when during its premiere, and the organ was so loud that it was overpowering everything else in the mix, and literally, like, I was shaking a little bit in my seat. I was like, "Oh my God, this is amazing!"
Oh my goodness.
But listening to it on its own, it's just kind of not something I would do, and that's
Yeah.
I don't think there's anything wrong with that, because first and foremost, your job is to serve the film, and then if you're lucky, you can find a way to maybe do the other thing, but that's like a secondary objective.
Yeah, so you mentioned the organ. That was the like pre-recorded organ that was mixed strangely rather than an actual physical organ there in the theater. Is that right?
Yes, although he did record that organ in a very famous church in Europe, and obviously, Hans Zimmer is not going to be one to deliver a subpar mix. So he really did his homework there.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. The days of live accompanying to screen are long, long gone. Unless you're talking about, like, if an orchestra wants to do Harry Potter in concert, and they'll buy the rights to play the movie without the music track, and then they'll play each cue,
Yeah.
live.
Yeah. I watch a lot of old silent films, and those sh shipped with the sheet music for the theaters, either just one person at a piano or perhaps an entire orchestra,
Yep.
to perform along with it, which I think is really interesting. I would love to see, different what's is there a word for that? Like different levels of just one person or a huge group performing the same piece of music?
Uh, well, if you're talking about that in abstract terms, I would say instrumentation or orchestration, maybe.
Okay.
Um, but if you're talking about a person taking something in one form or group of instruments and translating it to another, that would be an arranger. That's what an arranger does.
Okay. Thank you. Um, yeah, you mentioned how a really good soundtrack serves the purpose of the film or game or whatever it is that it's accompanying, and isn't necessarily great to listen to on its own. And that's got me thinking about another of the my five favorite themes that I picked out, which is Tubular Bells by Mike Oldfield, which is the theme to The Exorcist,
Mhm.
but existed before The Exorcist. And so I think that's really interesting because in many people's minds, the two are inextricably linked, but they were created completely independently of each other.
Yeah, there's actually a couple of examples, even in the horror genre, of directors uh, licensing like previously composed, even classical music, to serve the needs of the film without hiring a composer. The biggest one I can think of is The Shining, 1980. There is lots of Penderecki in that film, and Penderecki was a very avant-garde composer. He composed a lot of horrifying music. You'd almost call it noise music, except there's no synth. He makes the noise with the orchestra.
Oh, interesting.
And so it's it's a lot of violins going, just god awful noise, and and there's nothing tonal about it either. So you have the small, I promise, lesson in music theory. Whenever you play a note, you produce not just the fundamental pitch, but also every single pitch in the overtone series above it. And so the first one is an octave above, the second is a fifth above, and the third is a fourth above, which is now 2 octaves above the fundamental. And then finally, the next one is a third above that. So if you start with C, you end up with G and E. And if you put those together, that is a major triad, which is a very da da da. It's a very happy, very grounded and centered sound. And it's that way because the overtones are so close together. It's literally part of, for lack of a better term, the fabric of the universe. So it's like a warm blanket, that you cover yourself up in and just, I'm home. But then that's why you hear a lot of either like really out there concert works, or especially horror scores, completely reject all of that and do exactly the opposite. And so it's just like clusters, like notes really close together that don't really have a tonal center. And that is just exactly what Penderecki does. So it was a perfect match.
Yeah, that's really cool. You were talking about people choosing music that's incidentally useful for that. That reminds me of a scene in Friday the 13th, Part 5, A New Beginning, where a character is in her room and she like has a boombox and puts on a cassette tape and plays There's a Man with No Light in His Eyes by, oh gosh, I can't remember. But that scene was unscripted. The actor who plays that character just had a boombox and that cassette with her and was like listening to it, and the director was like, oh my gosh, this song is just incredibly appropriate for this movie. Let's create a scene so that we can include this. And I think that sort of serendipity is really interesting and fun.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So another one of the best soundtracks that I listed for myself here is the original Halloween theme, which was composed by John Carpenter, the same person who directed the movie.
Yep.
And so that's always fun when they're combined that way, especially if it's not just a vanity thing, but the person actually is really good at both artistic mediums, which John Carpenter very much is. And I was wondering if you've listened to any of John Carpenter's music that is not from his movies, because I haven't. I think it's really good.
I actually have not, but I know some of his scores pretty well, for sure.
Yeah. So his albums that he's put out that are just his, that are just music, they're not connected to any films or anything, are entitled Lost Themes 1, 2, and 3.
Oh, fun.
And the idea is that they're like theme music to movies that don't exist.
Right. Yeah. It's there are similar albums, not to bring up Austin Wintory again. He just released a few months ago, or maybe last year or something, an album called Remnants, where it was just track after track of demos that he created for projects that he didn't land. So rejection is a huge part of an artist's life, and so is like just coming up with ideas and then throwing them out because they don't work. So that's super cool. I'm actually really interested to hear that album now. Or 3 albums, you said, yeah?
Yeah.
Because it's always a fascinating window into like, oh, what didn't make it into a movie, you know, and why?
Yeah. And I'm talking about Austin Wintory's work like that. That reminds me of the song Megalovania by Toby Fox, the creator of Undertale,
Yes.
which is the theme to Undertale, but actually existed before Undertale. He just wrote it as an independent thing, didn't use it, and then used it again later for Undertale. Just fascinating.
Composers do that all the time. It's the best kept secret. I've done it too. I actually wrote a main theme specifically for when I was at USC getting my graduate degree. I wrote it for a game that I was working on with a very talented fellow. But the game never came to fruition, and life sort of happened, you know. But I still liked the theme that I wrote, and it was based on the sort of triumvirate of 3 main characters in the video game. And as luck would have it, years later, I got hired to write for a JRPG featuring 3 main characters, Shu, Jin, and Ko. So I was like, and so it's not the main theme per se, but it's the sort of overarching, like the map theme. And we got to, there are 6 nations, so we got to write different arrangements for that. But yeah, no, recycling is something that absolutely happens, as long as, you know, you haven't used it for anything that's been released before. I don't really see it as a cardinal sin, as long as it works and you wrote it, you know, who cares?
Yeah. There's for a perhaps more shameless example of that, the title of the movie's escaping me, but there's a Roger Corman science fiction film that came out like 2 years after Star Trek 3 and has the same composer as Star Trek 3 and very clearly uses almost exactly the same music, but not quite.
So you are talking about James Horner, and I know exactly the phenomenon you are discussing. Yes, there's this little turn that he does, da-da-da-da, that happens in just like every score he does. It's like he wrote a database of like 7 or 8 motifs and was just like, these are my movie motifs, and I'm only going to use these from now on for every movie. Yeah.
Like the guy's name just escaped me. Never mind. So another one of the movies that I have listed as my favorite soundtracks is Friday the 13th by Henry Manfredini, who great soundtrack, great, really iconic little not quite sting, but motif, I guess you'd say. And something that I found really interesting about it is that it is not using literal audio clips from the recorded dialogue or anything, but instead he came up really close to the microphone and spoke some of the dialogue, and then took clips of himself speaking into it.
That was very good, by the way.
Thank you. And the sentence that he said that he took the sound clips from is "kill them, mommy," and specifically the "ki" and
ma. Yep.
Ki, ma. And something that I'm really curious if you could explain why I and so many other people perceive it this way is I don't hear the "k" in "ki," and I don't hear the "m" in "ma." I hear it more as a ch, 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 ha, 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 with like a "ch" and a "h" sound. And most people that I've spoken with also hear it that way. They don't hear it the way that it supposedly actually is. And so I'm curious if you could explain why that happens.
I'm not sure. I mean, things do sort of, the more removed they are from the original source, sometimes the more altered it becomes. But also, ma, m in particular is not a vowel, so that doesn't really project nearly as well. But the k is interesting, because I feel like that is a very guttural utterance that would really come across well in a mix. But I know what you're talking about. Before I actually looked into Harry Manfredini's approach and got into those movies, I also thought it was like or something like that, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting phenomenon for sure. But I do love those movies, and in fact, there was a Friday the 13th video game. I don't know if you were aware of this.
I am. Yeah.
I think they took it down because of copyright reasons or something, but
That's
it
right.
for sure felt, I for sure heard that all over the place, the Kiki Mama Ma, and it was a lot of fun. A lot of like very Manfredini orchestral stuff too when Freddy gets close to you. So it was good fun.
Yeah, they did some really creative stuff with that video game. The final soundtrack that I picked out as being really great is Suspiria, written by the band Goblin. Are you familiar with Goblin?
I am, although I have to make a confession, which is that the Italian horror craze is a huge blind spot for me, which is particularly awful because I have a very close friend who is a cinephile, and he just raves about Dario Argento as being especially Suspiria. In fact, he at one time or another, 3 or 4 times, he got the entire friend group together to watch that movie. And for whatever reason, I ended up having a conflict every time. It was not on purpose.
Are you talking about our mutual friend Brian?
Yes, that would be him.
Yep. That is at one of those get-togethers is where I first saw Suspiria. And at the time, I also had a big blind spot about these Italian horror films, and that is what got me starting watching a whole bunch of them.
Well, yeah, and it's like everybody who's a film buff just has rave things to say about Argento from about 1971 to like 93, where it's roughly analogous to like John Carpenter's like 80s run, where just one movie after another was just incredible. So
yeah, he's quite an influential and significant filmmaker. And it's really amazing to me how sort of incestuous is the word that comes to mind, but that sounds sort of denigrating, which I don't mean to say, but how interconnected the Italian filmmaking community is, and that I'll watch all of these different movies and they'll be like, oh, all right, these are all directed by different people. Oh, except that the second unit producer or the second unit director on this movie is the director of that movie, and the second unit director of that movie is the director of this movie, and all of them have like, oh, these were all of these different movies. The soundtrack was composed by Goblin, except for these 3. I wonder why, like, these few, it was somebody else. And I look into it. Oh, the person who composed those is the main person in Goblin, and just wanted to do some work on his own, I guess. It's just incredible how prolific some of those people are.
Yeah, and it's that period of Italian filmmaking is interesting to me too, because I think I have seen one of those films, like a Giallo film. I don't remember which one it is. And the thing that struck me was that everyone was dubbed like every time. And
oh my gosh, yeah.
And I've also learned since then that they were also not necessarily speaking all in the same language. They just were basically just giving their lines, hoping that it was right for the scene, and then everything just gets dubbed in post.
Yes, I was going to say that if you weren't, because that's one of my favorite little anecdotes about Italian filmmaking. It's so different from what we're used to here in the West.
Yeah,
it's just wild. Everybody not necessarily even sharing a common language, and definitely not speaking in it when they're performing their lines. It's so different from anything I've seen anywhere else.
Yeah.
So I have 2 questions for you about how to effectively build the emotions that you want in music. And since this is specifically about horror, that's what the questions are focusing on. The first one is, a large part of what makes horror satisfying as a genre is the building and releasing of tension. And so it seems like there are some obvious cliche ways of doing that in music, which it might just be that I'm overexposed to them, but I find them sort of unsatisfying,
Hmm.
where it's like it's a violin that's going up in pitch and then cuts or suddenly a loud noise or something like that. And I'm curious if you could talk about the techniques that people use to build and release tension and what makes one more satisfying versus more cliche than another.
Absolutely. It's an excellent question. First of all, how do I put? Well, okay. So the what you just described about the violin, um, you know, going up and up and up, and there's a crescendo, and that's what you're really doing is telegraphing to the audience, hey, look, something's going to happen, which is a good way to not have a jump scare be as effective. So if that's your goal, it's not going to come off very effectively because people are expecting it, right? So it is often actually an effective technique if you want to put a red herring in there, right? Like nothing's actually going to happen, but you want to everyone on their toes anyway. That's really good for that.
Classic cat jumps in from off screen.
Yes, exactly. But if you want it to like really startle people, the best thing to do is to shut up, have the music do absolutely nothing. It's just non-existent because as a one of the most powerful things you can do as a composer is to play with contrast. And the greatest amount of contrast you can have is to literally just say nothing and let the scene speak for itself. So, like a good example of this, it's not a horror film, but it's a favorite of mine, and it's very suspenseful. So it's a similar sort of goal that the filmmakers are going for. It's No Country for Old Men.
Ah,
There's a scene in there where Llewellyn Moss is staying in a hotel, and he hears Anton Chigurh, the killer that's coming after him, and he
yeah.
turns off the light in his hotel room. He's got a gun. He's just kind of waiting to see what happens. And you see like the shadows of his 2 feet on the other side of the door, and you hear the sound of the thing that he's using, the little pressure thing that he uses to bust locks open. So you as an audience member know what's going on, but Llewellyn doesn't. And there's just absolutely no score in the film at all, really. Like very, very minimal,
Hmm.
uh, like maybe 5 minutes worth. But for sure in this scene, it is just dead silent, and there's just like creaking floorboards, uh, and then there's nothing, and then the camera just kind of like slowly pans up to the doorknob and holds for a couple seconds, and then, whoo, it gets like the lock gets completely blown off into Llewellyn, and that sound effect isn't very loud, but because of all of the silence that followed it, it's like a thunderclap. So like, yeah, I would say specifically for jump scares, that is almost always the technique I would use, because there's nothing more powerful. Like, another good example. I just thought of a horror example.
Yeah.
Midnight Mass came out quite recently. It's a Netflix limited series.
Yeah.
Um, there's a scene where one of the characters is looking out the window, and it's quite dark, and you don't really see anything unless you look really hard, and except that there's a figure that doesn't look like a figure, and then it moves, right? Uh, but that score is such an exercise in restraint. Like, aside from some of the like religious hymns, because it's very much about Catholicism, you
Yeah.
know, and spirituality and all that. But apart from that, the score does very, very little, and that's also what makes this so effective. Because right when the figure moves, you hear this cello go, and that's it. That's all the score does. It's not like a big orchestra coming in. It's not like a synth riser. Nothing. It's just like this. I mean, I'm not doing it justice, obviously, but
I'll have
uh,
to watch that. It's on my list, but I haven't gotten around to it yet.
but yeah, again, because of the silence that preceded it, and he really digs into the string too, or she, whoever the performer was, but it was effective. That's all you need when you set it up properly.
Yeah. I'm reminded of a video I watched a little while ago, which I actually strongly disagree with, which was a YouTube video essay about jump scares.
Hmm.
And they sort of gave like completely the opposite of advice of what you were saying here, of being like, well, you want to have creepy music that builds up until you've got the jump scare. And they specifically contrasted a scene in The Conjuring and a scene in Friday the 13th Part 8, Jason Takes Manhattan,
Hmm.
which where I just completely disagree and have the opposite opinion of them as to which one is more effective. In The Conjuring, what's happening is like there's a creepy ghost and it's on top of this wardrobe, but you don't see it at first. But the person walks towards the wardrobe, the music swells, and then you see the ghost. There's a loud noise, and it zooms in on the ghost. And to me, because the music was swelling like that, I knew exactly what was coming.
Right.
And it was very just, yep, okay, yep. And in contrast, the scene in Friday the 13th Part 8, Jason Takes Manhattan, is one of the few scenes in that movie that's actually set in Manhattan. It was filmed in Times Square, and it does sort of the opposite of all of those things, and sort of a twist on what you were saying about being silent beforehand, because the music is silent. There is no music before the jump scare.
Right.
But instead, what we get is all of the ambient noise of all of the people in Times Square,
Mm-hmm.
where our two protagonists are running away from Jason, and they think that they've successfully escaped him from the subway. But of course, we, the audience, know that that's not true because the movie isn't over yet. But they're in Times Square, they're surrounded by people, and they think that they are safe. And they're catching their breath, and then what happens is like people move past the camera, suddenly revealing Jason just standing there. And then instead of having like a loud jump scare sound effect, what happens is that they perfectly time that great Manfredini theme music to start the moment that we see Jason.
Mm.
And so it's less a jump scare and more of a sort of pursuit scare. It doesn't say like, hey, here's the scary thing happening right this instant. It's letting you know this is going to continue.
Yeah.
And I found that really effective. And it was interesting creating that. You talked about using the silence as the contrast, and how I didn't look at the levels to compare the actual volume or anything, but at least to my ear, the sound of the crowd was of similar intensity to the sound of the music that sort of replaces it when the music starts up.
Right.
But it still has that sort of effect.
Yeah. It sounds like like actually trying to do a jump scare with the music would have been a little cheesy in that moment. So a lighter touch was needed. And in particular, are you talking about the ki ma ma ma, or is it a more melodic thing? Okay.
I'm not. It's been a while since I've watched it, so I don't have it 100% in my mind. But
so one of the other things that's super effective too in a horror score is sometimes not necessarily scoring what we would call in the industry Mickey Mousing everything. Would be instead sort of playing the underlying emotion of it, or some kind of core concept, which is that there's a killer that just can't be stopped. Like, it doesn't matter what you do, they're just gonna keep coming. And so a lot of really effective scores have taken the stance of, oh, okay, instead of jump scares, I think it'd be a lot more scary if I just created a theme that was just a constant motor that just is as indefatigable as our foe, right? So there are a lot of examples of that. Halloween is a great example, John Carpenter. So is Jaws. That was,
I was just going to mention Jaws. Yeah.
John Williams' first Academy Award win. Yep. What else? The Thing. Oh, The Thing, probably my favorite of them all.
Could you remind me of that tune?
So, well, The Thing, there's an interesting story with the thing, which is that it was one of those occasions where John Carpenter didn't write his own score. He hired Ennio Morricone, who is a very, very prolific film score guy out of Italy. And he was actually so nervous to work with him. It's a very cute story because he was such a fan of his work. Yeah. But they got going, and initially Morricone wrote a very like melodic main title for the thing, and poor John Carpenter was like, "Oh, I don't think this is working. We gotta do something different." But Ennio was such a sweetheart. He was like, "Yeah, what would you like me to do?" And so he ended up writing that synth opening to the film, which is basically just bum 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 bum. It's all rhythm. It's not even really. There's no pitch at all involved, really, except for there's like a chord progression that you hear both in the orchestral and the synth cues every now and then. But it's very, very. It's in no way a theme or motif or anything. It's just,
interesting.
But yeah, the dum dum. There's just this synth pulsing synth sound, and it's the most chilling opening of a film that I think I've ever experienced. And it's just like a helicopter chasing a dog, and you're like, what is going on? Why are they trying to kill this dog? And it's a brilliant film. It's actually probably my favorite horror film of all time. But
it's a really good one.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm definitely about to completely butcher it, but Morricone, he did The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. That was the like do sort of thing.
The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Yep, and that is Morricone.
Okay. Yeah, I was gonna say the other movies scored by Morricone that I've listened to sound really, really different from The Thing, and and The Thing sounds like a John Carpenter theme, like with all the synth and the relative minimalism and repetitiveness, which earlier you were complaining about with Philip Glass, but
well, so the thing about the Thing score is that it does evolve in interesting ways, and it also it's not just synth. There's also some orchestral cues in there too that are really tastefully written by Ennio. The one that comes to mind in particular was when they're investigating the Swedish camp. I can never remember which one, but they always make fun of Mac because he gets it wrong. So here I am in the same boat. But yeah, when they land and they see all of this devastation and destruction, there's just this incredibly unsettling string cue, and it's just perfect, and I love it so much. So it's cool to have those competing elements. In fact, I think Ennio actually wrote an entire synth score and an entire orchestral score, and then it was just kind of treated as library music from there. They picked and choose which one they wanted, and just slapped it in there. And another fun bit of trivia: a couple of those cues that were unused for The Thing ended up in The Hateful Eight.
Oh,
yeah,
I didn't know that. I knew he scored The Hateful Eight, but I didn't know he reused some of the stuff from The Thing.
He did, although he was running so short on time because there was another film whose schedule was a little more crazy than he was expecting. And since Tarantino is famously one to license music rather than hire a composer anyway, he's just like, oh, let me just use some of your cues from this movie for these scenes. And it worked out.
Yeah, talking about composing two different soundtracks to the same movie reminded me of a thing I mentioned to bring up earlier when we were talking about the olden days when a soundtrack for film was like literally sheet music that accompanied it. The movie Metropolis by Fritz Lang in 1927, which is my favorite movie. Obviously it had its original soundtrack, which I quite enjoy, that it originally came out with. And then it's been re-released a bunch of times, and one of those times in 1984, it was released with an entirely new soundtrack that was, I believe, coordinated by Giorgio Moroder, but was actually written by a bunch of other people and by like several different people, including Freddie Mercury and Adam Ant.
Freddie Mercury, really?
Yeah.
That's a talented dude, or was, I should say.
Yeah. And so having seen it in both versions, it's really interesting how the different soundtrack creates a different feel in different scenes in the movie. So if you haven't watched that, which it sounds like you haven't watched the Freddie Mercury version, you should definitely check it out. It's really cool.
That is the first thing I'm going to do when I get an opportunity. Absolutely. The one thing I love more than a perfect score is a score that has an interesting history to it, and has different versions to it. And that actually kind of leads me, if you'll permit me, to
please do.
One of my other favorite horror scores, which is Alien, Ridley Scott's 1979 masterpiece.
Okay.
And so that was written by Jerry Goldsmith, who is widely considered in the film scoring community every bit the equal of John Williams. Just an absolute genius. But this score in particular is a fascinating study in what can go wrong between a director and composer. Because not that it went horribly wrong, like his score wasn't thrown out, which has happened several times in film music history on high profile stuff. But it was mainly just kind of like a communication breakdown, because first of all, it was one of Ridley Scott's first films. He's a very visual filmmaker, and I don't think he was used to like communicating with the composer, or like, giving them a little more slack about like how they can approach a scene, because Goldsmith was always of the opinion that, look, I'm not here to play what's on the screen. I'm here to play what's beneath it, what's going on emotionally with the characters. Like, it's your job. Like, that's the cinematographer, and that, like, you guys do what's on screen. I play the stuff beneath it, right? And so Ridley Scott was like basically wanting him to play it visually and just saying, write creepy music, So the famous example is on the main title. It's very creepy and very alien music. There's not a single melody, I think, until you see the Nostromo, and even then it's kind of weird and off kilter. But that was not his first draft at that. The first one had a very lyrical melody because he thought, well, it might be nice to just kind of play it like a straight sci-fi movie and then not telegraph to the audience that things are going to turn horrifically wrong later on.
Oh, interesting.
But then what happened is he had his recording session, because back then you couldn't send demos to people like you can today, where you mock up things and you make it sound more or less like the final cue, just kind of a lesser quality sort of.
Okay.
You basically, the best you could do is just play piano for someone, and if they couldn't parse that in their brains, then you just had to trust the composer to get it right. And so the recording session happened, and I think as a result of both Jerry being a little stubborn and the director kind of not really knowing how to communicate what he wanted quite effectively as yet, and also like as things happen, these things happen where you just have to cut down the length of the film, and that's what happened. So he delivered his score perfectly for this film, and then they cut out like 11 minutes of it. So then the music editor had to treat it as library music. And then there are a couple of cues. I've actually seen the film with Jerry's original score, and there are a couple moments where it's a little over the top. It's too much. So they actually temped the film, the editor did, with one of Jerry's old other scores. I think it was Freud. Yeah, it was Freud, 1962. So there were a couple of those cues in the temp, and afterwards they just decided, well, this temp music works better. We're just going to license it, and and it's
Oh,
and
wow.
the icing on the cake was at the very end of the film. It's probably been a while since you've seen it, but do you recall very lush relief when the alien finally gets expelled from the engine in
Uh,
the score?
yeah, I think so.
So that's Howard Hanson's Symphony Number 2, that they also licensed. It's literally just like classical concert music, and the irony of it is that Jerry loves writing lyrical romantic music. He would have loved to do that if he had just been asked to
Oh,
rewrite that. So he sits down and like half the score is either Freud or not even his, and he's so
geez.
upset that he refuses an Academy Award nomination over it. Uh,
Wow.
not that Jerry was like totally blameless either. Like I said, he was uh, he was a little stubborn, but it's just kind of a fascinating study um, and how important the collaboration process is, and
Yeah.
how important it is to be like on the same page with everybody, because it ended up still being a phenomenal movie, but it's
Yeah.
uh, you know.
Yeah. Wow. I'd love to hear that with you said you were able to see it with the original score somehow?
Yeah, I think the one of the recent releases
Oh,
on DVD or Blu-ray or something has,
special feature.
yeah, you can just play with all of the original cues. It's not obviously because it's cut down. It's
Yeah.
not totally
Because
how he would
that
have
11
envisioned it,
minutes that
but
yeah.
yeah.
You've used the phrase library music a few times, and I have a guess as to what that means, but how about you tell us what it actually means?
Sure, sure. So uh, it's kind of an imperfect way that I used it. Library music technically is just music that you compose as a composer, maybe with a specific sort of mood or feel or purpose in mind, but not anything for a specific project. And then you submit it to a library company,
Oh,
who then pay you for the privilege of having it in their catalog, and then they license that music out to filmmakers. Um, and
okay. So
then
like a stock photo company, but for music.
essentially, yes. And the reason why I was using that is not so much where the music came from, uh, but more like how the music editor was treating it in the film, right? So,
Okay.
yeah, ideally, what you have is the composer giving you a nice sort of already composed like fade out where it needs to fade out, and or like a nice hit where it needs to go out, that kind of thing. Uh, but if things change, if the edit changes, it's not going to be in the right place anymore. So the music editor has to figure out, okay, where do I fade out so that it sounds okay? Which part of this do I use? Can I slap things together to make it sound okay? Uh, and um, like I said, ideally, all the music editor really has to do is just place cues where they were intended and make sure that they're mixed well in the dub. That's it. Um, but yeah, it's and the great irony there too is that the music editor on Alien was a huge fan of Jerry Goldsmith. That's why he tempted with all this Freud. Um, but yeah, that's music editor is a very important job, almost as important as the composer. And a lot of people don't realize that. There is this fellow by the name of Kenny Hall, who passed away recently. He was one of my
Hmm.
instructors at USC, and he worked with Jerry Goldsmith and John Williams on a whole bunch of projects as music editor. And he had the best stories to tell. He was a wonderful human being. Uh,
Aw,
but
that's
yeah.
nice. Yeah. It's interesting. I remember first learning that the editor of a film is not necessarily the same person as the director of the film, and having my mind blown, like, how can you possibly create your vision as the director if you're not in control of the editing? um and I have since come to appreciate it as a separate role that really deserves its own credit. Talking about how the editor in uh Star Wars is what made Star Wars so great, and
Oh yeah, that movie was definitely saved in editing for
that's exactly the phrase that was in my mind, is saved in
sure.
editing.
No, yeah, but I mean, most of the time, directors do have a whole lot of control over the editing process. I mean, they sit in on all of those sessions, but the editor is there to be at the driver's seat, if you will, And good directors will, as they will with composers, will give them some latitude to experiment and see, maybe it's better this way, maybe it's better this way. But ultimately, the director has the final say in both cases.
Yeah. It sort of reminds me of pair programming, where one person is the driver who's literally typing on the keyboard, and one person is the navigator who is telling the driver what to do.
Right. That's a good analogy.
Thank you. Well, the other question that I had on my list of questions to ask you is what makes for a good scary sting? But I feel like we already kind of discussed that. So if you have anything extra you would like to say about that subject or any other subject, I would love to hear it. But otherwise, we've gotten through all of my questions.
Well, shoot, I don't know. I think it's really the thrust of it is, are you doing what's best for the film? And that's not always, I mean, that's actually rarely the same answer for each film. In fact, there's so many little decisions that you make in a film or a game or whatever, that you sometimes don't even know if it is the right answer until it's already out in the world, because it's so so. Are you familiar with what spotting is?
I have definitions for that word in my head, but none of them make sense in this context, so I don't think I am.
So spotting in the context of filmmaking, at least, is the process where the composer and the director, and sometimes producers and other people, sit down and watch the movie, the current cut of it. Hopefully, if it's picture locked. Excuse me. At that point, and then you kind of discuss with the director where the music should be, where it shouldn't be, where it should come in, where it should come out, what it should be doing in between those two things, and so basically, but on a high level, you're basically just talking about where the music should go. And even something as simple as that is not cut and dried. So for example, if you have a scene in a horror film where someone's trying to barge in through a door, and someone is on the other side of it, freaking out, looking around for something to pick up, maybe before they even get to the door, it's telegraphed, whatever the case happens to be. The real question is, where do you start the music? Do you start it before the character knows? Do you start it when there's a noise at the door? And do you start it where it's the door handle is moving and shaking? Do you start it with a close-up of the character who's freaking out? Do you start it when they grab their weapon? And each of those things has different meanings, and is saying different things. So it's complicated stuff. It's my favorite spotting example is the Batman film.
The most recent one?
No, the old one, the Tim Burton, 1989. Because everybody knows that theme, da 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 na na na, right? That's the big. But the cool thing is, there's this action sequence where Batman is tailing, I think it's the Joker or maybe Two-Face. I don't remember which exactly.
It was the Joker in that movie.
Okay. And it would have been so easy to play his theme when he's punching one of the bad guys, right? That's where you expected it to be, but that's not where the composer places it. Where he places the theme is when Batman is sort of stalking him, right? And there's this cape. He throws his cape to the side. There's this swoosh. So that says something about Batman's character. That's not just arbitrary, right? It says that Batman is not about frontal confrontation. It's about stalking his prey, about staying in the shadows, and so it's an interesting science, all of it, all in its own.
Yeah, that you sort of already partially answered this, but I'm going to ask anyway, just to make sure that I don't misunderstand you, and so you can elucidate it further if you choose. To what degree do you start composing for a film before the film has been filmed, and to what degree do you do it after? Because another friend of mine who's a composer, Brent Hengeveld, who has done music for some of my earlier games,
Mhm.
showed me some of his other projects that he's worked on, and there was a few where the beats of the uh, music were very specifically timed to the action, like it was an action scene and like the connection of punches and things like that. Um, and that I think was not for like a project for publication, but was like an exercise.
Mhm.
Um, and I'm curious uh, to what degree that's a thing that people do in the real world.
To what degree? I'm sorry. Say that
To
again.
what degree composing music after a scene has
Oh,
been filmed so as to make
yeah.
the beats of the music, the things that happen in the music, match up precisely with the things that happen on screen.
Yeah, so there are two schools of thought there. Actually, funny enough, Ennio Morricone was of the school that he just writes music and tosses it over the fence. He does that on most of his projects, which is baffling to me because I want to be in total control of what the score is doing at any given frame. Like I want it to be like frame locked, then give it to me, and then I'll figure it out. And then obviously you can give me notes, but like I want to be able to know if I need to hit something, I want to know exactly where it is, right? So that I can build up to it properly. And um, yeah, there's and really these days, because everything is so digital and so instantaneous, that's the way most people work. You really only saw that other kind of thing in the olden days. Although I will say the exception is if you have time, it's always a good idea to write like a suite of themes or a suite or some kind of piece of music that has that isn't actually going to go in the film, but to sort of um, create a palette, if you will, and get you into um, the spirit of the film um, and kind of show the director what your musical approach might be in a general sense. That can be super helpful if you have the time for it, I think.
That makes sense. Cool. Yeah, and I imagine nowadays, thanks to those digital tools that you mentioned, the if you have time for it is more about the time to actually compose as opposed to the time needed to record, because especially for this sort of palette thing, I would imagine you're mostly using synthesized instruments and things like that rather than actually getting an orchestra or what have you to record the music.
So people will some musicians would kill me for saying this, but the advancement of technology has reached a point where you can almost imperceptibly imitate an orchestra with just your computer. Now, obviously, you need a lot of power to do that, and you also need to know a lot about orchestration to make sure that things sound to make sure you get to the place where they sound convincing. So it's not like it doesn't take a whole lot of effort, but the point is, if you don't have a budget for a recording session, you can still make it sound pretty realistic nowadays, um, which is not, and sometimes, you know, 10-ish years ago, like the Final Fantasy VII soundtrack, for instance, is very orchestral, but it doesn't sound realistic, and that's part of the charm of it.
Yeah.
Um, it's no, you can get it to sound pretty real. Like, was this recorded at Sony or Fox or was it samples? I don't know. Like it just by listening to it, um, unless you're trying to do something like really out there.
Like that
Um,
noise orchestra that you were describing earlier.
Yeah, and even that, to a certain degree, has become commodified. Like there are libraries out there you can use where you can buy pre-recorded like stingers and like risers, and where the orchestra is just going nuts. Um, but uh, to achieve a specific effect that you want, you're basically going to have a recording session. In fact, the story with what was that game called? Jason Graves. Uh, the big horror trilogy, AAA one, Dead Space. Uh,
Oh, Yes.
So the composer for that was Jason Graves, and he went on record for saying, "Look, I can't do this with samples. You're gonna have to give me money for a recording session." And they gave him one, and instead of just like doing what most composers would do and just okay, I'm going to do this specific effect and this specific effect, and it's going to end here. Let's record that cue and move on. No, what he did instead was record a bunch of building blocks, essentially assembling his own sample library. And then after the fact, he would use it much the same way you would any other library, except that it was custom recorded especially for his purposes. And the result was incredible. It's like John Corelliana's Altered States, but on steroid overdrive. Like it's just nuts. And it goes, I mean, incredible power in that score, very violent power.
Cool.
Yeah. Oh, and one other thing I wanted to mention, I would be remiss in not mentioning Christopher Young if we're going to be talking about film scores, horror film scores especially, because he got his start with Hellraiser.
Oh, I love Hellraiser.
In particular, the second one is one of my favorite scores because it's got the same sort of core emotional theme to it, but it's produced much more in this like gothic horror tradition where, because the characters are literally going to hell, and the craziness and the grandeur that entails is really well represented in his score. I just love it to death. And I actually got to spend many hours with him. He was also one of my instructors at USC. We got to go to his studio a lot as students. He was one of the most giving instructors I've ever had in my life. Like I think he actually like bought a house and started renting it out to up and coming composers just so that they could like get their feet on the ground. And he just made up the difference in rent that they couldn't pay. Just wonderful, wonderful man. And the thing I'll always remember about his studio is that it was 365 days a year, just covered in Halloween memorabilia. Not the Halloween movie itself necessarily, but just like spooky stuff, like jack-o'-lanterns and figures from horror movies. And it was just great. Like it was a very infectious enthusiasm for that genre.
Yeah. Done up like the first movie that he composed for, The Dorm That Dripped Blood. Oh man, that inspired me really tangentially to ask another question, which is, I'm curious what your opinion is on this trend that I've seen in sort of modern remakes or soft reboots or sequels or what have you to classic films, where they take the music from the original film and update it to make it sound more quote unquote epic. And so the specific example that I have in mind is in Akira Ifukube's original Godzilla theme was updated by Bear McCreary for Godzilla King of the Monsters.
Yes.
And it's the same, I mean, like it's the same tune and everything. But it's, again, as a non-musician, and the word that comes to mind is they're trying to make it sound more epic.
Right.
I'm curious what you think about that.
So in this particular case, I may be a bit biased because Bear is actually the one who scored that Battlestar Galactica reboot. So I've been a fan of his for a long time. And so in my mind, it's very difficult for him to do anything wrong. And especially taiko drums and a lot of the techniques, the sort of instrumentation and techniques that he uses in that film, he was already using in other stuff. And so it just felt like, rather than a dumbing down, it felt more like a match made in heaven to me in that particular case, because it was a lot of fun to hear the Godzilla theme with literally a row of taiko drummers, hammering away.
And the chanting, which was not in the original.
Right. Yes. So in that particular instance, I thought it was quite effective. I did enjoy that score a lot. so making something more bigger or more epic to me is not necessarily a bad thing. What does tend to happen sometimes is when um, they take that to mean generic, make it more generic, more bland, more like the temp track, more like this specific film, which is not this film, but make it more like this specific film. Like when you get into that area where you're trying to emulate something that doesn't quite fit, but just because it's in vogue, that's
Yeah.
generally where I take issue.
Yeah. Sort of reminds me of the loudness wars thing. Not literally, but like in a metaphorical way of making everything sounding a bit more, everything trying too hard and therefore sounding more similar to
Mhm.
each other.
Yeah,
Okay.
and in fact, temp love is a hotly debated term in the film scoring community, which is I'm not sure if I've explained this yet, but temp music is when an editor takes music from another source, like usually another film, and places it in their edit just to help them edit, to get to establish the pacing of the scene and whatnot. But then they fall so in love with that piece of music that they then come to the composer and say, "Can you do this for me?" Instead of, "What would you like to do?" It's, "No, make it closer to this. I want this."
Yeah.
Because they've spent so much time with it. Like it's not, um, it's not anything malicious. They're just like, "This is what it is now. This is what's in my brain." Um, and it's, different composers have different views on that. I personally like to hear temp tracks, um, because it's then a springboard for a conversation about, okay, what about this did you like? What about this music do you not like? What can I do to sort of more adequately um, form it into your film, as it were?
Yeah.
But there are a lot of composers too who are just like, I don't want to hear the temp track. Just give me the film and we'll go from there.
Yeah. The the balancing act between having a good jumping off point versus getting anchored on something instead of freely exploring.
Right, and that too, if the filmmakers do end up, you know, giving you a tons of revisions and saying, no, make it more like the temp, make it more like the temp. Eventually, what you might get is too close to the temp to the point at which it's a legal problem, or
Oh,
at the
wow.
very least, if not a legal problem, at the very least, it's an originality problem, right? Like
Yeah.
there's nothing new that the score is saying anymore, and maybe isn't even strictly appropriate or as appropriate as it could be. So,
Yeah. That is an interesting dilemma. uh, yeah, I wonder if, just thinking back to what we were talking about earlier, I wonder if somebody besides John Carpenter had made the thing from Another World remake. Um, if someone besides John Carpenter had made that, but ended up with that same Ennio Morricone theme music, if John Carpenter would have listened to that and thought, that sounds like Ennio Morricone is ripping me off.
yeah,
Uh,
that's interesting. I never thought of it that way. Um,
we were talking earlier about how some composers, or well, all composers really, I think, have their own style. You can usually listen to a piece, and if you're already familiar with the person who wrote it, even if you've never listened to that piece before, you can guess who wrote it.
right.
But that can go too far. And I was trying to remember the name of a specific film composer whose work I enjoy, but whose work sure does start to sound similar to each other, especially as the guy's career progresses, which is Danny Elfman.
Okay.
And I'm curious if you agree with that, uh, or disagree, or if you have other like composers or anecdotes that you would share in that vein.
I think Danny Elfman, hmm, he certainly has a brand and a sound, much like a lot of other composers, Thomas Newman, John Williams. Um, you, there are certain composers that just they produce their brand, and filmmakers seek out that brand, and that's their strength, right?
Yeah.
And there are other composers where their strength is being a sort of chameleon, um, which is a bit rarer, but those people usually have more opportunities because there's just more avenues that they can pursue. So I've always tried at least to be one of those chameleons, but although I'm very, very early in my career, so I can't really lay claim to anything too crazy. But I would say Jerry Goldsmith was very good at reinventing himself. Really incredible innovation with stuff like what was the name of that film? Planet of the Apes, the original one, the 1968, I want to say 60 something.
Yeah.
Where it was he wanted the score to be so alien to convince the audience that they weren't actually on Earth, that he just used like kitchen utensils and like just all kinds of weird shit that you would never actually use, in producing very strange sounds.
Yeah. Which I thought worked really well in this sort of giving hints that this is a post-apocalyptic setting where they have access to mass-produced things like that, but not necessarily to the specific tools that you would want in a given instance, which is musical instruments.
Exactly. Yes. So yeah, there are definitely the exceptions to the rule where you have a composer that's just really adept at adapting their entire stylistic approach. But for the most part, you have like, if you play a track, I can tell you which composer it is, and there's a reason for that, because they they found their musical identity, and that's a whole conversation too. Are you supposed to find your musical identity that's unique, or not? And I think finding a right balance between those is good, because if you because you need that identity in order to not lose yourself, but also to like market yourself effectively. But you also diversity and your ability to adapt is also very valuable.
Yeah. It's wild to me that Jerry Goldsmith both did that, sort of did the soundtrack for Aliens, as you were describing earlier, and he also did the soundtrack for E.T.
Oh, actually, Jerry Goldsmith did not do the soundtrack for E.T. That was John Williams.
Oh, he did?
He did, yes, and that was
I'm
one
sorry.
of his
I guess
most
I
beloved
misremembered.
scores. Oh, no worries. I actually have a fun anecdote about E.T. too, with the fellow that I mentioned before, the music editor. He was on the dubbing stage for the scene where the bicycles lift off, so that when the FBI is chasing them, and all of the sound guys had turned the sound effects way up and the music down so that you could barely hear it.
Okay.
And this guy was like, "Oh my God, what are you guys doing? This scene is not about the sound effects. This is about John Williams's sweeping score. It's not going to work without the, and then Steven Spielberg walks in and says, "All right, guys, show me what you got." And they hit play, and Kenny goes up to the mixing console, shoves the music up full blast, and it goes off in its glorious splendor, overpowering, mostly overpowering the sound effects. And Spielberg gets a tear in his eye, and he says, "It's perfect. Keep going."
That's great. You're talking about people using things that aren't musical instruments a moment ago reminded me of a fictional composer that I listened to, who's the character Gene Belcher in the TV show Bob's Burgers. Have you ever seen that show?
I have not, but I've seen the. Wasn't there like a feature film coming out about Bob's Burgers too?
Yeah, there was a feature film. It was released a few months ago in theaters, and
it's already out.
It just hit streaming a few days ago, so it's on Hulu right now. I really like the show, and it is sort of a musical in that there are frequently there will be like one or two songs in an episode, and often the songs are musical style where like they're sort of happening in the fictional reality of the show, but they're also incorporating fantastical elements to a degree, but also very frequently the songs are entirely diegetic, where like the characters are singing them
Oh
and
wow.
they're playing the and they're just like they're characters who are improvising, and frequently it's actually the actors improvising the songs.
Hmm.
And the character of Jean is a child who's sort of sometimes portrayed as musically precocious and sometimes portrayed as just very enthusiastic but not especially talented. Um, but a frequently recurring thing that happens with him specifically is him using things that were not designed as musical instruments as musical instruments. Um, and so if you were familiar with that character, then I would love to hear your thoughts about it. But since you haven't seen the show, you doubt you could really comment on it. But I'm just going to recommend it. I really like the show, and in particular, I like that character.
I've heard a lot of good things about it. I'm sure I will get to it at some point.
Yeah. And the movie is sort of a musical. It has like I think 3 or 4 songs in it. That are full on musical spectacular with a bunch of choreography.
Mhm.
But it's not like it's sung through or anything like that.
Sure.
I had another question in mind, but it's slipped my mind at the moment.
Is it about horror scores or
Uh,
movies or
it was something that you inspired me to ask about based on what one of the things that you were um just talking about.
the dub stage thing?
Sorry, say that again.
The dub stage thing?
Sure, tell us more about that.
Oh no, I'm
Oh.
trying to refresh your memory.
No, sorry, that's not jogging it. That's okay. Uh, I've had a great time talking with you about all of this. It's
Good.
fun learning things. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your expertise.
I'm glad to be here. This was a lot of fun.
Great. And for the audience listening, I am going to, as I said, upload another episode at the same time as I upload this that is just the theme music from Fear of the Unknown. And I'm also going to do the same with my other music that I've commissioned from Brent Hengeveld for previous games that I've released. There's the theme for Professor Pugnacious and Cultists of Cthulhu and Murder Most Foul. And so you can listen to all of those as an accompaniment to this episode. Thanks again for coming on, Brian, and I'll talk to you more later. Do you have anything you'd like to tell the audience to look out for? You want to tell us about that upcoming JRPG again? Where can people go to learn more about that?
Oh, sure, yeah. So let's see. Yeah, it's www.shujinko.net. We will be releasing part 1 of 3, presumably at the end of the year, or maybe shortly thereafter, on all major platforms except Xbox, I think. I think we've got Wii, Steam, and PS4 and 5.
Okay, and how do you spell Shujenko?
So that is Shujinkou. It's the Japanese word for hero. I'm not sure if I mentioned this before, but it also doubles as a language learning game. So it's, I mean, in addition to we're doing quite a monumental story to keep players engaged, even if they don't want to engage with the learning aspects. But that is certainly an equal priority for us. And
Cool.
yeah, we're really excited about it.
And you said that's coming early next year?
Either at the end of this year or early next year. Yes.
Cool. Well, I'll definitely keep an eye out for it. And it looks like I can enter my email address to make sure that I get updates on that, which is great. I should really set something like that up for Fear of the Unknown.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, it's been great having you, and I look forward to seeing you again. Maybe next time we hang out, we can watch some Italian movie with a great score.
I would love that.